The cold winds of the north howled through the towering walls of Winterfell as Lord Torrhen Stark gazed into the distance, his breath a mist in the freezing air. The Raven had arrived that morning. Aegon Targaryen, the Conqueror, had landed in Westeros, and the kingdoms were already falling one by one. The south trembled under dragonfire, and soon the north would be faced with a choice: kneel or burn. Torrhen was a proud man, a Stark through and through. The blood of the first men ran deep in his veins, and he had no love for the Valyrian invaders. Yet he was no fool. He had heard the stories of Harrenhal's destruction, of how Aegon's dragons had melted stone like butter, and how King Mern of the Reach had been reduced to ashes in an instant. To stand against the Targaryens was to invite annihilation. His sons stood beside him. Brandon, his eldest, a warrior with the heart of a direwolf, and his younger son, Edwyle, more thoughtful, but no less loyal. "We should march south," Brandon said, gripping the hilt of his sword. "The north has never bent the knee. Let them try to burn us. Winter will freeze their dragons." Torrhen exhaled slowly. "And what happens when their dragons burn the crops? When the castles are turned to ruins? We may endure the cold, but we cannot survive fire." Edwyle, ever the voice of reason, stepped forward. "Perhaps there is another way. We do not have to fight, nor do we have to kneel as cowards." "What if we join them instead?" Brandon scoffed. "Join them? You want to sully our bloodline with Valyrian filth?" Edwyle shook his head. "It is not filth, it is power. The Starks and Targaryens together would be unstoppable. We can forge an alliance that will ensure our place in Westeros for generations." Torrhen considered his son's words. He had planned to kneel before Aegon, to surrender the north and save his people from destruction. But an alliance, that was something different. He turned to his Maester. "Send a raven to Aegon. Tell him that House Stark does not seek war. But nor do we submit like beaten dogs. If he wishes the North's loyalty, let him take one of my daughters for a queen." The message was sent, and within weeks Aegon's reply came. The Targaryen king was intrigued by the proposal and agreed to meet. When Aegon arrived in the north, the sight of his dragons sent waves of fear through Winterfell. Even the hardiest warriors trembled at the sight of the beasts. Yet Torrhen Stark did not flinch. He met the Dragon Lord with the quiet strength of a man who knew his own worth. Aegon was not a cruel conqueror. He was a ruler who sought unity. And so, instead of bending the knee, Torrhen extended his hand in peace. His daughter, Valessa Stark, was betrothed to Aegon's son, Ennis. The marriage would bind ice and fire together in a way that had never been seen before. With that single union, history was rewritten. The North did not fall. Instead, it became a powerful ally to the Targaryens, and from that moment on, no one could challenge their rule. But not all were pleased with this new alliance. In the shadows, forces conspired against the union of Stark and Targaryen, for there were those who feared what such a bond could mean for the future of Westeros. The days following the union between House Stark and House Targaryen were filled with both celebration and tension. The people of the North were uneasy about this alliance. Valyrians were outsiders, dragon lords who bent kingdoms to their will through fire and fear. The North had always been independent, ruled by its own blood, its own kings. Now they had to accept that their lords had sworn fealty not just to a southern ruler, but had joined their blood with dragon riders. Torrhen Stark stood on the battlements of Winterfell, watching as the dragons perched near the godswood, their golden eyes glowing like embers in the night. Their presence alone was enough to keep even the most rebellious lords silent. Few dared to voice their dissent openly, but Torrhen could feel the unrest brewing beneath the surface. Beside him stood his daughter, Valessa Stark, now betrothed to Aenys Targaryen. She was young, barely a woman, but her eyes carried the same unyielding strength of her ancestors. She had not protested the betrothal, though she had not welcomed it either. "You are uneasy," Torrhen said, his voice calm. Valessa did not look at him. "I do not fear the dragons. I do not fear the South, but I do not know if the North will ever accept them." Torrhen sighed. "They will have no choice. This is bigger than us, Valessa. This is about the future of our house, of our people. The North cannot stand alone forever. It is better to join the fire than to be consumed by it." Valessa nodded, though her face remained unreadable. "I will do my duty, father. I will marry Aenys Targaryen. But I swear this: I will not become one of them. I am a Stark of Winterfell." Torrhen placed a hand on her shoulder, proud of her resolve. "And that, my daughter, is exactly why this marriage will work." The wedding was held in Winterfell beneath the eyes of the old gods. The contrast was stark. Valyrian dragon lords standing among northern lords clad in fur, fire meeting ice in a way that had never been seen before. Aenys was fair-haired, with violet eyes that marked him as a true Targaryen, while Valessa was dark-haired and pale, her grey eyes cold as a winter storm. As the vows were spoken, Lord Stark watched the faces of his bannermen. Some, like the Manderleys and the Umbers, had accepted this new alliance, recognizing the power it brought. But others, like Lord Bolton, remained silent, their eyes filled with suspicion. That night a feast was held in the great hall of Winterfell. Aegon himself had remained in the south, trusting his son to secure the northern alliance, but Princess Rhaenys, Aegon's sister-wife, had come in his place. She was different from her brother, more charming, more understanding of how to win the hearts of those who did not trust the Targaryens. She spoke with the northern lords, listened to their concerns, and assured them that House Targaryen did not seek to rule them with an iron fist, but not all could be won over with words. In the shadows of the great keep, a plan was already in motion. Lord Roose Bolton had gathered a small group of men whispering of rebellion. The Starks had tainted their blood, they said. They had abandoned the ways of the first men to kneel before foreign invaders. "They have brought dragons into our land," Bolton murmured to his most loyal men. "But dragons can bleed, and when they bleed, they die." The night after the wedding, a terrible storm swept over Winterfell. Snow fell in thick sheets, the wind howling through the trees. It was the perfect cover for treachery. In the darkness, Bolton's men moved swiftly. Their target was Aenys Targaryen. If they could kill him, the alliance would shatter before it could take root. But they had not accounted for Valessa. She had never trusted the Boltons, and on this night she had chosen to keep watch outside her husband's chambers. when she saw the figures creeping through the halls, their daggers glinting in the dim torchlight. She knew. She did not hesitate. Steel met steel in the corridor outside Aenys's room. Valessa moved like a wolf, her blade cutting through the first assassin before he could make a sound. The others turned on her, but she was not alone. The dire wolf came out of the shadows, a massive beast, its grey fur blending with the snow, its eyes burning like embers. With a feral snarl, it tore into the would-be assassins, ripping flesh and bone apart in an explosion of blood and screams. The commotion roused Aenys, who emerged from his chambers just in time to see his wife standing over the bodies of his would-be killers, her breath ragged, her sword dripping with blood. You saved me," he said, stunned. Valessa wiped the blade on her cloak. "They will try again," she said coldly. "We have to be ready." By dawn, the castle was in an uproar. Lord Bolton denied any involvement, but Torrhen Stark was no fool. He knew what had happened. There would be no rebellion, not yet, but there would be consequences. Aenys had seen enough to know that the North was not easily tamed. "You were right," he told Valessa that morning. "The North is not like the rest of Westeros. It will never bow fully to the dragons." Valessa looked out over the snow-covered landscape, her expression unreadable. "Then the dragons will have to learn to live in the cold." The attempt on Aenys's life only strengthened the alliance. Torrhen had the men responsible executed, making it clear that the North would not tolerate traitors. But the tension remained, lurking beneath the surface like a beast waiting to strike. As the years passed, the bond between House Stark and House Targaryen grew. Valessa and Aenys had children who carried the blood of both fire and ice. Some were born with silver hair and violet eyes, others with the dark features of the North. They were unlike anything Westeros had ever seen. And when Aegon the Conqueror finally passed, leaving the throne to his son, the realm realized a great truth. The Starks were no longer just rulers of the North, they were now part of the Iron Throne itself. And House Stark had become something new, something greater than anyone had ever imagined. Years passed, but the tension between fire and ice never fully disappeared. The North had bent, but it had not broken. The union between House Stark and House Targaryen was supposed to bring peace, yet beneath the surface cracks had begun to form. Valessa Stark had done her duty. She had married Aenys Targaryen, bore him children, and stood beside him as his father, Aegon the Conqueror, continued to rule from the Iron Throne. But she had never forgotten who she was. Winterfell had changed since the dragons arrived. Though Aenys spent most of his time in the south, Valessa remained in the north, ruling in her father's stead as he grew older. She ensured that the North was governed by Northerners, that its traditions were preserved, but she could not stop the unease that festered in the hearts of her people. To the North, she was still a Stark, but to many she was also tainted by the South, by the dragon blood that now flowed through her children's veins. And in the darkness a storm was brewing. Deep in the halls of Dreadfort, where the banners of House Bolton still hung like silent spectres, voices murmured in the candlelit chamber. Lord Roose Bolton had been stripped of his power after his failed assassination attempt, but his son, Domeric Bolton, had quietly taken his place, biding his time. "The Starks have betrayed their own blood," one of the gathered lords hissed. "They Kneel to dragons, let their daughters bear Valyrian spawn. How much longer before the North is ruled not by wolves, but by fire-blooded tyrants? Domric leaned forward, his pale eyes calculating. The North remembers, he murmured, but the South forgets. They think we are beaten, that our loyalty is bought with silver and titles. But the moment will come, and when it does, winter will rise again. They had learned from their past mistakes. This would not be a foolish rebellion that ended in open slaughter. This time they would be patient. This time they would strike when the dragon least expected it, and so the seeds of treason were planted. Word reached Valessa that Aenys was returning to Winterfell. He was no longer just her husband. He was now king of the 7 kingdoms. Aegon the Conqueror had died, leaving his son to rule in his place. It was said that Aenys was not his father's son in temperament. Where Aegon had been decisive, Aenys was hesitant. Where Aegon had been feared, Aenys sought to be loved. His reign was fragile, and already there were whispers in the south that he was not strong enough to hold the realm together. Now he was, coming to the north to cement his rule, to remind the northern lords that the dragon still ruled from the Iron Throne. But Valessa knew better. He was not coming to rule. He was coming because he was afraid. Winterfell was different now. The old gods watched as Valyrian banners fluttered beside direwolves. The halls smelled not only of roasting meat and pine, but also of the strange spices brought from King's Landing. Aenys arrived with a grand procession, knights of the Kingsguard, banners of House Targaryen flying high, and, most importantly, a dragon, Vermithor. The sight of the great beast circling above Winterfell sent shudders through the gathered crowd. This was not Balerion the Black Dread, but even Vermithor was a creature of nightmare to the Northerners. The North did not fear the cold, did not fear steel, but it had always feared fire. When Aenys dismounted, he embraced Valessa in full view of the crowd, whispering in her ear.
"I need your help, my love." Valessa stepped back, eyes searching his face. "What has happened?" Aenys hesitated. "The realm is restless. The faith militants rise against me in the south. The Reach murmurs rebellion. And Dawn has never
forgiven us. I need the North." Valessa felt the weight of his words settle upon her shoulders. "And what do you expect of us?" Aenys looked at her with the desperation of a man who knew he was losing his grip on the realm. "I need to prove that the North is loyal, that it stands with the Iron Throne." Valessa turned her gaze toward the gathering of northern lords who had come to witness their king's arrival. Their faces were unreadable, their loyalty uncertain. "You ask for the North's loyalty," she said carefully. "But loyalty is earned, not demanded." Aenys frowned. "I am your husband." "You are my husband," she agreed. "But you are not a Stark, and in the North that matters." The days that followed were filled with tense meetings. Aenys held a feast in Winterfell, speaking of unity, of a great
future where House Stark and House Targaryen ruled together in peace.
But beneath the surface a storm was growing. Lord Domric Bolton and his allies were already preparing. Their plan was simple. Aenys Targaryen would die in the North, and with his death the fragile balance between House Stark and House Targaryen would collapse. The North would be free once more. But they had underestimated one thing. They had underestimated Valessa Stark. The halls of Winterfell echoed with the voices of the gathered lords, their words polite but laced with unspoken resentment. Aenys Targaryen, king of the Seven Kingdoms, sat at the high table beside his wife, Valessa Stark, his hands clasped in silent tension. Though he was the ruler of Westeros, the North did not feel like his kingdom. It felt like hers. The Northern lords had come to hear their king, but they had not come for him. They had come because of Valessa. She watched them carefully, her sharp grey eyes reading every gesture, every flicker of discontent that passed between them. She could feel it, the quiet conspiracy brewing beneath the surface, the subtle defiance in the way Lord Domeric Bolton sat too comfortably, in the way Lord Karstark's gaze lingered a moment too long on Aenys before shifting away. She knew treachery when she saw it. Aenys, oblivious to the undercurrents of danger, raised his goblet and smiled. "My lords, I drink to the North, to our unity, to our strength, and to the bonds that tie House Stark and House Targaryen together." There were murmurs of agreement, but the words lacked warmth. They toasted, but some drank slowly, as if wary of the very wine in their cups. And then the moment came. A servant moved behind Aenys, too quiet, too purposeful. Valessa saw it before anyone else, the flicker of steel hidden beneath his cloak, the tension in his steps as he approached the king. A dagger, thin and sharp, gleamed in the firelight. The man lunged. Valessa moved before she even thought. With the speed of a wolf, she was out of her seat, her hand gripping the assassin's wrist before the blade could reach Aenys's throat. The force of her movement sent them both crashing onto the table, goblets spilling, plates shattering. Aenys stumbled back, his eyes wide with shock as the hall erupted into chaos. Guards rushed forward, steel drawn. The assassin struggled, but Valessa was stronger. She wrenched the blade from his grasp and drove it into his throat with a brutal precision. Blood sprayed across the table, dark and thick. Silence followed, thick and heavy. The man gurgled, his body convulsing before falling limp in a pool of red. Valessa rose to her feet, her breath steady, her face unreadable. She turned, her gaze locking on to Domeric Bolton, who had not moved from his seat. His face was impassive, but she saw the flicker of something in his eyes. He had not expected her to act so swiftly. She took a step forward, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. "This was not the act of a lone man," she said coldly. "This was planned." Aenys, still shaken, turned to his guards. "Find the others, now!" The room erupted into motion. The guards stormed out, dragging suspected men with them. But Valessa did not need to see the evidence to know the truth. The North was testing its queen, and she had answered. That night the halls of Winterfell were heavy with tension. Aenys paced the chamber they shared, his face pale. They tried to
"Kill me," he whispered, "in your own hall, among your own people."
Valessa sat on the edge of the bed, watching him with calm intensity. "They do not see you as their king. They see you as a dragon in a den of wolves." Aenys stopped, turning to her. "You saved my life." "You are my husband," she said simply. "But
"You are also a Stark," he countered. "And if the North rises against me, will you stand by me, or will you stand by them?" Silence stretched between them. The fire in the hearth crackled, the only sound in the chamber. Valessa stood and approached, him placing a hand on his chest.
The North does not betray easily, but it does not forgive easily either. If you wish to rule here, you must earn it. Not through fear, not through dragons, but through respect. Aenys swallowed. And how do I do that? She met his gaze, her expression
unreadable. You listen. You understand. And you show them that you are not just a king of the South. You are their king too.
But while Aenys struggled to secure his rule, the true danger still lurked in the shadows. Domeric Bolton had not expected the attempt to fail. He had underestimated Valessa, but one failed strike did not mean the war was lost. The North would not rise overnight. It would take patience, subtlety. And so he changed his approach. He sent out whispers to the lords still uncertain about this Dragon King. He sowed the seeds of doubt, reminding them that the Starks had once ruled as kings in the North, not servants to foreign rulers. "The dragons will burn us in the end," he murmured to Lord Dustin. "Their fire does not warm, it consumes." "The Starks have forgotten their duty," he told Lord Riswell. "They kneel when they should stand." Piece by piece, the North began to shift.
Not yet open rebellion. Not yet war. But the time would come, and when it did, the dragons would bleed.
Aenys, determined to show his rule was just, called for a trial to find out who had plotted against him. But trials in the North were not as they were in the South. Here a man could demand trial by combat, and Domeric Bolton did exactly that. He chose his champion, a massive warrior, known for his cruelty, a man who had never lost a fight. But before Aenys could even respond, another voice spoke first. "I will be the king's champion." Valessa Stark stepped forward, her grey eyes like steel. The hall fell silent. The North had always been a land of warriors, and Valessa had been raised with a sword in her hand. But for a woman, a queen, to fight in trial by combat, it was unheard of. Domeric Bolton smirked. "You wish to fight in place of your husband, my queen?" Valessa did not hesitate. "A Stark fights for their own." Aenys stepped forward, grabbing her arm. "You don't have to do this." She met his gaze. "Yes, I do, because if she won, she would prove that she was still a Stark, still a daughter of the North. And if she lost, then the North would truly be lost to the dragons." The courtyard was filled with men and women of the North, their breath visible in the cold air as they gathered to witness the fight. Valessa stood in the centre, her sword steady, her expression unreadable. Across from her, the Bolton champion sneered, towering over her like a beast. Domeric Bolton watched from the side, amusement flickering in his eyes. He believed this would be easy. He did not understand. A Stark does not kneel, a Stark does not falter, and a Stark does not lose. As the signal was given, the Bolton warrior lunged, and the battle for the future of the North began. The air was thick with tension, the cold biting against Valessa's skin as she stood in the courtyard of Winterfell, her sword firm in her grip. The northern lords had gathered in a great circle, their eyes filled with uncertainty, curiosity, and in some cases amusement. A queen fighting in a trial by combat, It was unheard of. Across from her stood the Bolton champion, a massive brute of a man named Veric Snow. His face was scarred from countless battles, his body thick with muscle. He carried a great sword, its edge already nicked from the many men it had slain. Domeric Bolton watched from the sidelines, his lips curled in a slight smirk. He thought this was already won. Ennis, standing beside the Maester, looked uneasy. This was not how Targaryens ruled. They did not fight in the mud like common warriors. But Valessa Stark was no ordinary queen. The horns blew, signalling the beginning of the duel. Veric Snow charged first, his great sword swinging toward her with enough force to break bone. Valessa did not try to meet his strength. She was faster. She sidestepped, her own blade slicing toward his ribs. He turned, just in time, the edge of her sword glancing off his armor. A lesser opponent might have been cautious now, realizing she was not an easy target. But Veric was a brute, and brutes
fought with fury, not patience. He swung again, this time faster, and Valessa barely managed to duck. The force of his swing sent dirt flying into the air. The North watched in silence, waiting. Would their queen prove herself, or would she die?
And with her, the fragile alliance between the Starks and the Targaryens. Veric came at her again, thinking his strength would eventually break her defenses. Valessa let him believe it. She dodged, retreated, let him swing wildly. Every time he struck, he missed by inches. Every time he turned, she was already moving. He grew angrier, his breath ragged in the cold air. And then she saw her opening, a small shift in his footing.
A single misstep. She moved like a shadow, her sword lashed out, carving through the exposed flesh between his shoulder and his neck. Blood sprayed onto the snow, steaming in the cold. Veric roared, stumbling, his sword dropping slightly. That was
all she needed. She stepped in close, too close for him to use his massive blade. She drove her knee into his gut, then spun, her sword slashing deep across his hamstring. He collapsed onto one knee, panting. Valessa raised her sword. "Yield," she said. Veric growled, clutching his bleeding leg. "Never," she sighed, then drove her blade straight through his throat. The North gasped. Blood poured from his mouth as he gurgled, his eyes wide in shock. She pulled her sword free, and his body slumped to the ground, lifeless. She turned, her grey eyes locking on to Domeric Bolton. "Your champion is dead," she said coldly. "Your treason is plain for all to see." Domeric's smirk had vanished. He knew what was coming next. Ennis stepped forward, finally finding his voice. "Domeric Bolton, you have betrayed your king, and the punishment for treason." But Valessa interrupted him. "No, he is a Northman, and he will die a Northman's death." Ennis hesitated, but he saw the way the lords of the North were watching. They were waiting. He nodded. "So be it." Domeric Bolton was dragged before the gathered lords. His hands were bound, his face set in a grim expression. The last time a Bolton had attempted to rise against a Stark, it had been thousands of years ago. Now history repeated itself. Valessa did not hesitate. House Bolton is known for flaying
its enemies, she said, her voice carrying across the courtyard.
But treachery has a cost. The execution was carried out in the old way, the northern way. His throat was cut beneath the weirwood tree, his blood staining the snow red. The old gods watched in silence as the last of his house fell, leaving
only a memory. The message was clear. The North had spoken. How stark was still its heart. As the body was dragged away, Aenys turned to Valessa.
There was something new in his eyes. "Respect, you saved me," he said again. She nodded. "A ruler is only as strong as the people who follow him. Now the North follows you." Aenys exhaled. "Then perhaps I should listen to you more often," Valessa smirked. "That would be wise." The North had been tested, and fire had met ice. But it had not melted. It had hardened, and the future of Westeros had been changed forever. Years later, the children of Aenys and Valessa would rule both the North and the Iron Throne. They carried dragon blood in their veins, but their hearts beat with the spirit of wolves. Some had the silver hair of Valyria. Others had the dark hair and grey eyes of the first men. But all of them were something new, a dynasty unlike any Westeros had ever seen, a dynasty forged of ice and fire,